Hey everyone, welcome to Dr. Sleep. We love creating unique content for you, but we need your support now more than ever. Our channel is facing some challenges, and we really need your interaction. If you enjoy what we offer, please subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share our videos with your friends. Every comment, like, and share makes a huge difference. Let's grow together and keep bringing you the content you care about. Thank you for your continued support. The dirt road twisted deeper into the forest, the car bouncing over uneven terrain as Amy gripped the wheel tighter. "This place better be worth it," she muttered, glancing at the GPS, which had long since stopped displaying a signal. Beside her, Jake grinned. "It's supposed to be completely off the grid," he said. "No tourists, no noise, just us and nature." In the back seat, Lisa, Tom, and Sarah were already bickering over who would carry the gear. "It's not my fault you packed half your wardrobe," Lisa teased, nudging Sarah's overstuffed backpack. When they finally arrived, the campsite was eerily perfect. A small clearing surrounded by towering trees, their branches weaving into a dense canopy that blocked most of the sunlight. A chill hung in the air, though it was midsummer. The forest was unusually quiet, no rustling leaves or chirping birds, as if the woods were holding their breath. They unpacked quickly, setting up tents and starting a fire. As night fell, the group gathered around the crackling flames, the warm glow illuminating their faces. Jake was the first to suggest it. "Let's tell some scary stories." Amy rolled her eyes. "You're such a cliché." "Come on, it's tradition," Jake said. "I'll start." He leaned forward, his voice low and conspiratorial. "There's this story about a tree in the middle of the woods. It looks like any other tree during the day, but at night, it's different. If you get too close, you'll see faces in the bark. Not carved faces, real ones. They say the tree feeds on souls, and every face belonged to someone it caught." Lisa shivered and hugged her knees. "Great, now I won't be able to sleep," she muttered. Amy smirked. "Weak, my turn." She told the tale of the drowned woman, a ghost who haunted still lakes and ponds. "She's always waiting for someone to get close enough to pull under. You'll hear her crying first, soft and distant. By the time you see her, it's already too late." Tom chuckled nervously. "Good one. But I've got something better." His story was about a skin thief, a creature that hunted humans to steal their flesh and wear it like a disguise. It stitches the skin together, piece by piece, until it looks just like you. Lisa's tale followed, a terrifying account of living shadows that drag people into the darkness, never to be seen again. And Sarah, quiet until now, finished with the story of the Stitched Man, a monstrous figure cobbled together from the missing pieces of its victims. By the time the fire had burned low, their laughter was strained, their glances darting toward the dark woods. Shadows from the firelight stretched unnaturally long, shifting as though they had lives of their own. "All right," Jake said, his voice breaking the silence. "Time for bed. Just don't get eaten by the tree." They laughed, but it was forced. As they crawled into their tents, the forest silence pressed against them like a physical weight. None of them noticed the faint shifting shadows just beyond the dying embers of the fire. The first rays of sunlight filtered through the thick canopy, illuminating the campsite in dappled light. Amy was the first to wake, stretching as she unzipped her tent and stepped into the brisk morning air. She rubbed her eyes, blinking at the strange stillness of the forest. The usual morning sounds, chirping birds, rustling leaves, were absent. It wasn't until she turned toward the fire pit that her breath hitched. A tree, one she didn't remember being so close to the camp, loomed nearby. The bark was rough and uneven, but as she stared, her stomach twisted. Was it her imagination, or did the ridges in the bark resemble a face? "Hey guys," she called, her voice trembling slightly. "Get up." Jake stumbled out of his tent, hair disheveled, followed by Lisa and Tom. Sarah emerged last, yawning and rubbing her arms. "What's going on?" Jake asked, his voice still groggy. Amy pointed at the tree, but now the face was gone. She frowned, unsure whether she'd imagined it. "Never mind, it's nothing." They gathered around the fire pit, reigniting the embers for breakfast. As Jake rifled through his backpack for supplies, he froze. "What the hell?" He lifted the bag, showing the others the jagged tears across its fabric. The contents had been scattered, and long, thin strands of black thread lay among his belongings. Lisa frowned. What would do that, a raccoon? Amy crouched to pick up one of the threads, holding it up to the light. This isn't normal. It's like someone was stitching something and left this behind. Or something, Sarah murmured, glancing uneasily at the woods. The tension was broken by Tom's shout. He was standing near the edge of the clearing, staring at the ground. Footprints, he said, but not ours. The group crowded around him. Sure enough, a trail of wet, bare footprints led from the woods, circling their campsite before disappearing into the underbrush. They were faint but unmistakably human. No way someone came here in the middle of the night without us hearing, Jake said, his voice firm, but his eyes betrayed his doubt. Sarah shivered, wrapping her arms around herself. I thought I saw someone last night, she admitted quietly, just watching us from the woods. Why didn't you say anything? Lisa asked, her voice rising in alarm. Because I wasn't sure, Sarah snapped, and now I wish I had. Amy, trying to maintain control of the situation, suggested they explore the area. Let's just look around, make sure no one's here, she said. Then we can decide if we're staying. They split into pairs, leaving Sarah by the fire. As they searched, more unsettling signs emerged. Jake and Amy found claw marks etched into a tree trunk, deep and deliberate. Lisa and Tom discovered a pile of stones arranged in a crude spiral, surrounded by patches of damp earth, as if water had seeped up from nowhere. When they reconvened, unease hung heavy in the air. None of them spoke it aloud, but they all felt it. Something wasn't right. And somewhere, just out of sight, the forest was watching. After breakfast, the group decided to explore further, hoping to shake off the morning's unease. The sunlight filtered through the dense canopy, cast shifting patterns on the forest floor. Yet, despite the daylight, an oppressive stillness clung to the air, making every step feel heavy. Amy led the way, her eyes darting to every shadow. Let's just make a quick loop and head back. I don't want to wander too far, she said, her voice clipped. Lisa laughed nervously. Afraid of the big bad tree? Amy shot her a look but said nothing. Jake stayed close, his grip tight on the stick he'd picked up. Just in case, he muttered when Lisa teased him about it. They came across the first oddity not far from camp, a shallow pond that none of them remembered seeing on their hike in. The water was dark and murky, its surface reflecting the trees around it like a grimy mirror. Tom crouched near the edge, picking up a rock to toss in. Don't, Sarah said sharply, startling everyone. She looked pale, her eyes fixed on the water. Just don't. Tom shrugged and stood, tossing the rock aside. Fine, it's just a pond. Ponds don't just appear overnight, Jake said, frowning. Amy squatted by the edge, studying the water. Her stomach churned as she noticed something beneath the surface, a faint shape, too vague to make out but disturbingly humanoid. She straightened quickly, brushing her hands on her pants. Let's keep moving. They pressed on, following what they thought was a game trail. The forest seemed to change subtly as they walked. Trees twisted unnaturally, their branches forming unnatural shapes that loomed overhead like skeletal hands. The path narrowed, forcing them to walk single file. Guys, Lisa called out from the rear. Is it just me, or does it feel like we're going in circles? Jake stopped abruptly. It's not just you. Ahead of them stood a tree with deep gouges carved into its bark, gouges they'd passed before. Amy's pulse quickened. We've been here already. Great, Tom muttered, lost in the middle of nowhere. No, we're not lost, Jake snapped, though his voice lacked conviction. We'll head back to camp. As they retraced their steps, Lisa stumbled over something buried beneath the leaves. She bent to pick it up and froze. What the hell? She whispered. It was a patch of skin, pale and leathery, with jagged edges as though it had been torn from something or someone. Worse, it had been pierced through with a rusted nail, pinning it to the tree next to her. Amy grabbed Lisa's arm, pulling her back. Leave it, she said urgently. Let's go. Lisa let the piece of skin fall, her hands trembling. They hurried back to camp in silence, each one feeling the weight of unseen eyes on them. When they finally reached the clearing, Sarah ran to meet them, her face white. Where were you? She demanded. Something was here, I heard it, heavy footsteps like boots, and it didn't sound human. The group stood in uneasy silence, the forest pressing closer. No one wanted to admit it, but they all felt the same thing. They were no longer alone. By the time the sun began its descent, a deep unease had settled over the camp. The group sat close to the fire, their laughter and banter from the night before replaced with forced small talk. Shadows stretched long across the clearing, growing darker with every passing moment. Jake broke the silence. "We should leave in the morning," he said, poking the fire with a stick. "This place is off." Amy, sitting beside him, nodded. "Agreed. Something isn't right here." Tom crossed his arms. "We've already paid for the permits. We can't just bail because of some spooky vibes." "Spooky vibes?" Lisa snapped. "Tom, we found skin nailed to a tree today. That's not a vibe." "That's a huge neon red flag." Sarah sat apart from the others, her gaze fixed on the dark line where the trees met the clearing. "It doesn't matter if we leave," she said quietly. "It'll follow us." The others turned to her. "What are you talking about?" Amy asked. Sarah didn't answer. Her eyes stayed locked on the trees. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. The group fell silent. At first there was nothing but the crackling of the fire. Then it came. Faint, deliberate footsteps circling the edge of the clearing. Each step crunched softly against the forest floor, unnaturally slow and purposeful. Tom shot to his feet, grabbing the stick he'd been carving into a makeshift spear. "Who's out there?" he shouted. The footsteps stopped abruptly, the sudden silence deafening. The group held their breath, waiting, the firelight flickering in the stillness. Then from the trees came a low, guttural sound, half growl, half moan, that sent a chill racing down their spines. "Back to the tents," Jake said, his voice trembling. "Now." They scrambled to their tents, zipping them closed as if the thin fabric could protect them. Amy clutched her flashlight, her heart pounding as she and Lisa huddled together. Outside, the footsteps started again, slower this time, circling closer to the tents. "Do you see anything?" Lisa whispered. Amy shook her head, too afraid to speak. The footsteps stopped outside their tent, so close she could hear the faint rustle of leaves. A shadow passed across the thin fabric, long and misshapen, its movements jerky and unnatural. Suddenly, from the other tent, Tom screamed, "Get away!" Amy and Lisa unzipped their tent just enough to peer out. Tom stood by the fire, his stick held like a weapon. The firelight cast his shadow large against the trees, but there was another shadow, a towering figure, its outline grotesque, standing just beyond the light. Jake bolted out of his tent, yanking Tom back. "Run!" he shouted. The group fled into the woods, their flashlights bouncing as they sprinted through the dark. Behind them, heavy footsteps followed, faster now, closing in. A guttural growl echoed through the trees, and the group scattered in panic. Amy stumbled, her flashlight flickering. She looked back just in time to see a figure standing in the distance, its twisted form illuminated by the dying campfire. It didn't move, but tilted its head slowly, as if watching her. Then the light went out. Amy's flashlight flickered back to life, casting a narrow beam through the trees. Her heart pounded as she scanned the forest, but the figure was gone. She scrambled to her feet, calling out, "Lisa, Jake, where are you?" No answer. A rustling sound to her left made her whip around, the light trembling in her shaking hand. A branch snapped, and she saw a flash of movement, Lisa stumbling toward her. "Amy, run!" Lisa hissed, grabbing her arm and pulling her forward. "What happened?" Amy asked breathlessly as they sprinted through the woods. "It's following us," Lisa gasped. "I saw it up close, its face. God, it looked stitched together like patchwork." Amy's stomach turned. Lisa's description matched Tom's campfire story too well. "Where are the others?" Amy asked, glancing over her shoulder. "I don't know," Lisa said, panic rising in her voice. "They went the other way. We have to keep moving." The two ran blindly, dodging low-hanging branches and uneven ground. The forest seemed alive, the trees looming closer, their gnarled branches clawing at them as if trying to hold them back. The oppressive darkness made it impossible to tell how far they'd gone, or if they were even moving in the right direction. They burst into a small clearing and stopped, doubling over to catch their breath. Amy shone her flashlight around, but the beam barely penetrated the suffocating darkness. "Do you hear that?" Lisa whispered. Amy strained her ears. At first she heard nothing but their own ragged breathing. Then it came, a soft squelching sound, wet and rhythmic, like footsteps dragging through mud. "It's close," Amy whispered, clutching Lisa's arm. From the darkness, a figure emerged, illuminated by the weak beam of Amy's flashlight. It was hunched, its long limbs bent at unnatural angles. Its skin was a patchwork of pale, stitched-together pieces, the seams glistening as if freshly sewn. The head turned toward them slowly, its face a grotesque mask of mismatched features. The eyes, two different colors, one dull and lifeless, fixed on them. "Run," Lisa whimpered. But neither of them moved. The creature tilted its head as if studying them, then took a step forward. The wet squelching sound grew louder as it dragged one malformed leg behind it. Amy snapped out of her trance and grabbed Lisa's hand. "Go," she screamed. They tore through the forest, the creature's uneven footsteps pounding behind them. Amy's lungs burned as she ran, her mind racing with thoughts of the stories they'd told. The tree with faces, the stitched man, the drowned woman. How could any of it be real? A faint light appeared ahead, and Amy realized it was the campfire, still smoldering. "We're back," she cried. "The others might be here." They stumbled into the clearing, but it was empty. The tents were torn, the fire pit surrounded by muddy footprints. Amy turned, expecting the creature to be right behind them. But the clearing was silent. The creature was gone, and the faces in the bark of the tree by the campfire were staring at them. Amy froze, her flashlight beam shaking as it landed on the twisted tree by the campfire. The bark, rough and gnarled, bore grotesque, human-like faces. They were crude but unmistakable. Sunken eyes, screaming mouths, and contorted expressions of pain etched deep into the wood. Her breath hitched when one face shifted slightly as though it was trying to speak. Lisa grabbed her arm. "We have to go," she whispered urgently. But Amy couldn't move. One of the faces resembled Jake. The empty eyes stared back at her, and the mouth, slightly ajar, seemed frozen mid-scream. "Lisa," Amy stammered, pointing. I don't care," Lisa snapped, yanking her arm. "We're leaving now." Amy allowed herself to be dragged away, her gaze lingering on the tree until it disappeared behind the thick foliage. The wind picked up, and the forest came alive with unnatural sounds, low groans, creaking branches, and faint guttural noises that seemed to surround them. As they moved deeper into the woods, Lisa tightened her grip on Amy's hand. "Do you think the others are okay?" she asked, her voice trembling. Amy didn't answer. She couldn't shake the image of the faces from her mind, especially Jake's. Were the stories they'd told around the campfire not just coming true, but claiming them one by one? She shoved the thought aside. They had to find the others first. They stumbled upon a narrow path that led to a small, stagnant pond. The water was black and still, its surface reflecting the gnarled trees around it like a warped mirror. Amy stopped abruptly, her flashlight sweeping the area. "This wasn't here before," Lisa said, glancing around nervously. "Was it?" Amy shook her head. The pond hadn't been there earlier, but now it stretched out before them like a dark, gaping mouth. As they approached, the water rippled, though there was no wind. "I don't like this," Lisa said, taking a step back. Amy moved closer, despite her instincts screaming at her to stay away. Something gleamed just below the surface, a pale, indistinct shape. She crouched down, shining her flashlight into the murky depths. The light revealed a woman's face just beneath the water, her eyes wide and unblinking. Her pale skin glowed faintly, and her hair fanned out around her like a dark halo. The woman's lips moved silently, forming words Amy couldn't hear. Amy staggered back, her heart hammering. "There's something in there." The pond began to churn violently, the water bubbling and frothing. The woman's face disappeared, replaced by a skeletal hand that shot out of the water, grasping at the air. Lisa screamed as the hand clawed at the edge of the pond, pulling the rest of the figure into view. The drowned woman rose slowly, her gaunt, skeletal frame dripping with water. Her empty eyes locked onto Amy and Lisa, and her mouth opened in a silent scream. "Run!" Amy yelled, grabbing Lisa and bolting back into the trees as the drowned woman dragged herself fully onto the shore. Behind them, the sound of wet footsteps echoed through the forest. Amy and Lisa didn't stop running until their lungs burned, and their legs felt like they might give out. The forest blurred around them, the dark shapes of trees stretching endlessly in all directions. The sound of wet footsteps faded, replaced by the oppressive silence of the woods. Still, Amy couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. "We can't keep running," Lisa gasped, doubling over. "We need to find the others." Amy nodded, though her heart sank at the thought. What if... She stopped herself, unwilling to voice her fears. They might be back at camp. Lisa straightened, her face pale but determined. "Then let's go." The path twisted and turned as they retraced their steps, the oppressive atmosphere of the forest bearing down on them. It was as though the trees were leaning closer, their twisted branches forming unnatural shapes in the dim light. Shadows moved at the edges of their vision, too fleeting to confirm. As they neared the camp, Lisa froze mid-step, her eyes widening. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. Amy strained her ears, and at first she heard nothing. Then it came, a faint rhythmic sound, like fabric being torn and stitched together. The noise sent a chill down her spine, its slow, deliberate rhythm making her stomach churn. They crept forward cautiously, stepping as lightly as they could. When they reached the edge of the clearing, they stopped dead. The campfire was completely extinguished, and the tents were torn to shreds. But that wasn't what made Lisa clasp a hand over her mouth in horror. A figure stood in the middle of the clearing, hunched over something. Its grotesque silhouette was barely visible in the dim light, but Amy's flashlight revealed its horrifying details. The creature was tall and thin, its skin a patchwork of different tones and textures. Thick black thread stitched its body together, the seams crisscrossing like a macabre quilt. Its head jerked unnaturally, as if its neck couldn't fully support it. The creature was stitching. Long, needle-like fingers dragged black thread through a torn piece of flesh on its arm. It didn't seem to notice them at first, too absorbed in its grim task. Then it stopped, the needle hovering mid-air. Slowly, it tilted its head toward them, its mismatched eyes glinting in the darkness. Lisa let out a strangled cry, and the creature rose to its full height, towering over them. Its head cocked to the side, and its mouth split into a wide, jagged grin, revealing teeth like broken glass. "Run," Amy whispered, grabbing Lisa's arm. They bolted back into the forest, the sound of tearing and stitching replaced by heavy, pounding footsteps. Amy's flashlight beam bounced wildly, barely illuminating the path ahead. Behind them, the creature's raspy breathing grew louder, each exhale like a rattling death rattle. They didn't dare look back. But as they ran, Amy couldn't shake the feeling that the forest itself was closing in, twisting the paths to keep them trapped. The pounding footsteps behind them stopped abruptly, leaving only the oppressive silence of the forest. Amy and Lisa slowed their frantic pace, gasping for air and clutching at tree trunks for support. The light from Amy's flashlight wavered as her trembling hand struggled to hold it steady. Did we lose it?" Lisa asked between gasps, her voice barely above a whisper. Amy didn't answer, scanning the forest with wide eyes. The trees seemed to lean closer, their shadows stretching unnaturally long in the flickering beam of her flashlight. The stillness was suffocating, and for a moment, the two could hear nothing but their own ragged breathing. A faint rustling sound to their right made both women snap their heads in that direction. The shadows between the trees shifted, rippling as if alive. Amy pointed her flashlight, but the beam seemed to disappear into the darkness, swallowed whole. What is that?" Lisa whispered, clutching Amy's arm tightly. The shadows continued to move, coalescing into shapes that defied explanation. Limbs stretched where they shouldn't, bodies bent and twisted in unnatural ways. Amy's stomach churned as the shapes began to take on familiar forms, faces she recognized. "Tom?" she breathed, her voice trembling. The shadowy figure that resembled Tom stepped closer, its movements jerky and disjointed. Its face was wrong, the features twisted and grotesque, like a reflection in a shattered mirror. Behind it, more shadows emerged, each one taking the form of someone they knew. Jake, Sarah, even Lisa and Amy themselves. "This isn't real," Lisa said, shaking her head. "This can't be real." The shadowy doppelgangers advanced slowly, their blackened hands stretching out as if to grab them. Amy's flashlight flickered again, the beam growing weaker. "Run," she whispered, pulling Lisa with her. They sprinted through the trees, the shadows following in eerie silence. Amy's mind raced as she tried to process what was happening. The stories they had told around the campfire were coming to life, but not in the way they had imagined. These things were warped versions of their fears, twisted into something far worse. Lisa stumbled and fell, crying out as she hit the ground. Amy turned back, reaching for her friend, but stopped cold. One of the shadows was standing over Lisa, its head tilted unnaturally to the side. It raised a hand, its fingers elongating into sharp, claw-like points. "Get up!" Amy screamed, grabbing Lisa and yanking her to her feet. They ran again, the shadow close behind them. Its presence was suffocating, an unnatural void that seemed to pull the light from their surroundings. When they finally broke into another clearing, the shadow stopped at the edge, writhing and shifting like smoke. Amy and Lisa stood panting, too afraid to move. The shadows didn't cross the invisible boundary, but they lingered, watching, their hollow eyes glinting with malice. "They're waiting," Lisa whispered, her voice hollow. "For what?" Amy asked. Lisa turned to her, her face pale. "For the dark." Amy and Lisa stood in the clearing, their breaths coming in shallow gasps. The writhing shadows at the edge of the forest didn't move closer, but their presence was a constant, looming threat. Amy's flashlight flickered, the battery threatening to die. "We can't just stand here," Lisa whispered, her voice barely audible. "We have to find the others." Amy nodded, though her legs felt like lead. "We need to move before it gets completely dark," she said, glancing at the horizon where the last sliver of sunlight was rapidly fading. They stepped cautiously out of the clearing, sticking to what they thought was the trail. Every sound made Amy's pulse race, the crunch of leaves beneath their feet, the snap of a distant branch, the rustle of unseen movement in the underbrush. The forest felt alive, as though it were breathing with them, its heartbeat matching their fear. Do you think they're okay?" Lisa asked, her voice trembling. Amy hesitated. "I don't know," she admitted, "but we'll find them. We have to." As they pressed on, the oppressive darkness grew heavier. The trees seemed to close in, their branches twisting together to block out even the faintest hint of moonlight. Amy's flashlight beam barely penetrated the gloom, casting eerie, flickering shadows. Then they heard it, a low, guttural growl that froze them in their tracks. The sound came from ahead, deep and resonant, vibrating through the still air. Amy gripped Lisa's arm, her heart hammering in her chest. "Stay close," she whispered. The growl came again, closer this time. The underbrush rustled, and a figure stepped into view. It was the stitched creature, its patchwork skin glistening in the faint light. The thick black threads holding it together seemed to pulse, as though alive. It raised its head, its mismatched eyes locking onto them. Amy grabbed a nearby branch, brandishing it like a weapon. "Stay back," she shouted, though her voice cracked with fear. The creature tilted its head, its jagged grin stretching impossibly wide. Then it lunged. Amy swung the branch, striking the creature's arm, but it didn't even flinch. Its long, clawed fingers swiped at her, narrowly missing as she stumbled backward. Lisa screamed, grabbing a rock and hurling it at the creature's head. The impact made it stagger briefly, giving them a precious moment to run. They bolted through the woods, the creature's heavy footsteps pounding behind them. Amy's flashlight finally died, plunging them into complete darkness. Blindly they ran, the sound of snapping branches and Lisa's panicked breaths guiding Amy. As they ran, the stitched creature let out a guttural roar, and the shadows surged forward, blocking their path. Amy stopped short, her heart sinking. The shadows twisted into humanoid shapes, each one more horrifying than the last. She recognized the warped face of Sarah among them, her mouth opening in a soundless scream. Lisa sobbed. "It's over. We're not getting out." Amy shook her head. "We have to try." She grabbed Lisa's hand and ran toward the tree. The faces on its bark twisted, their expressions of pain intensifying as the women approached. Amy placed her hand on the rough bark, feeling a surge of heat beneath her palm. "What are you doing?" Lisa asked, her voice frantic. Amy didn't answer. She grabbed one of the hanging branches, snapping it off with a loud crack. The stitched creature and shadows hesitated, as if wary of the tree. Amy swung the branch at the shadows, and they recoiled, their forms flickering like fire about to be extinguished. "Go!" Amy shouted, pulling Lisa through the gap. They ran, the shadows melting away as they passed the tree's boundary. The stitched creature roared again, but didn't follow. The oppressive darkness lifted as they burst onto the dirt road where their car was parked. Amy fumbled for the keys, shoving Lisa into the passenger seat. The engine roared to life, and she sped down the road without looking back. As they drove, Amy's hands shook. Lisa sat silently, staring out the window. "We made it," Lisa whispered, but her voice was hollow. Amy nodded, though her mind was racing. She glanced in the rearview mirror, her blood running cold. In the back seat, barely illuminated by the dim interior light, was the stitched creature's face. The car veered and crashed as Amy screamed. Hey everyone, I'm an archaeologist, and I recently experienced something so bizarre that I can't keep it to myself any longer. I've debated for weeks whether to share this, but I think the truth needs to come out. Please bear with me, as this might sound unbelievable at first, but I assure you, everything I'm about to tell you is real. A few months ago, I stumbled upon a link while browsing a forum on the dark web. Now, I'm not a regular on these kinds of sites, but I was chasing a lead on some obscure historical artifacts and ended up going down a rabbit hole. The link led to a page that advertised an undiscovered archaeological site located in a remote part of Eastern Europe. There were a few grainy photos of what looked like ancient ruins and a vague description of the location. Curiosity got the best of me. The images showed artifacts unlike anything I'd seen before, pieces that seemed out of place for any known civilization. I gathered my equipment and convinced a colleague, John, to join me on this impromptu expedition. We booked our flights and set off, prepared for what we thought would be a fascinating but routine dig. The site was incredibly isolated, miles from the nearest village. We had to hire a local guide to help us navigate the dense forest that surrounded the area. As we approached, I felt a strange sensation, a mix of excitement and dread. The air was heavy, almost oppressive, and the forest grew unnaturally quiet the closer we got. When we finally arrived, the ruins were more extensive than I'd imagined. Stone structures covered in strange symbols stood partially buried in the earth. The architecture didn't match anything from known historical records. It was a mix of styles, some resembling ancient Mesopotamian, others more akin to Mesoamerican. It was as if cultures separated by thousands of miles and years had somehow converged. Our first few days were spent cataloging and photographing the site. We found pottery, tools, and carvings that hinted at a highly advanced yet entirely unknown civilization. But things started to get weird when we began to unearth the deeper layers. One night, while John and I were examining a particularly ornate piece of pottery, our guide, Pavel, approached us looking visibly shaken. He told us he had seen lights in the forest, moving in unnatural patterns. We brushed it off as superstition or maybe even poachers, but his fear was palpable. He insisted we should leave, but we were too engrossed in our findings to take him seriously. The next day, we uncovered a large stone tablet. The carvings on it were unlike any language I'd ever seen. As we carefully brushed away the dirt, we noticed something strange. Embedded within the stone were tiny, almost microscopic artifacts made of materials that shouldn't have existed at the time this tablet was made. Metals that were only discovered in the last century, and what looked like tiny mechanical parts. I spent that night trying to make sense of it all, poring over my notes and comparing them with known historical records. Nothing added up. Around midnight, I heard a rustling outside my tent. Thinking it was John, I stepped out, only to find Pavel standing at the edge of the site, staring into the forest. He turned to me and whispered, "They're watching us." I didn't sleep much after that. The following day, we made a breakthrough. We uncovered a series of tunnels beneath the ruins. The air inside was stale, and the walls were covered in more of those strange symbols. As we ventured deeper, we found rooms filled with artifacts that defied all logic. Advanced tools, preserved documents written in that same unknown language, and most disturbingly, a collection of human skulls. These weren't just any skulls. They had elongated craniums reminiscent of the ancient practice of head binding. But these were different. The bone structure suggested they weren't modified human skulls, but a distinct, unknown species. My mind raced with the implications. Could this be evidence of a forgotten chapter of human history? or something even more unfathomable? Just as we were about to leave the tunnels for the day, we heard a noise from deeper within, an eerie, echoing sound that sent chills down my spine. It was rhythmic, almost like chanting. We decided it was best to return to the surface and regroup. That night, as I reviewed the day's findings, John came into my tent, his face pale. He handed me a piece of parchment he'd found in one of the rooms. It was brittle but remarkably well preserved. The writing on it was in that same unknown script, but there were also drawings, depictions of human-like figures performing rituals, surrounded by strange, glowing symbols. As we sat there trying to decipher the parchment, we heard a scream from outside. Rushing out, we found Pavel gone. His tent was empty, his belongings scattered. The only trace of him was a trail leading into the forest. We searched for hours, but found no sign of him. Exhausted and frightened, we decided to leave the site at first light. Before we could pack up, however, something stopped us in our tracks. In the early dawn light, we saw figures standing at the edge of the forest, just out of reach of the morning sun. They were tall, with elongated heads, and their eyes glowed faintly in the dim light. They watched us silently as we hurriedly gathered our things. We left the site that day, but the experience has haunted me since. I've tried to find any record of similar discoveries, but there's nothing. It's as if this civilization never existed. I'm not sure what we found in those ruins, but it's clear that there's a hidden chapter of human history, one that someone, or something, wants to keep buried. I'll be sharing more details and photos in the coming days, but for now I need to process everything that's happened. If anyone has experienced anything similar, please let me know. I feel like I'm on the verge of uncovering something monumental, but I can't do it alone. Thanks for the feedback and support on my last post. It's been overwhelming, to say the least. After returning from the site, I spent weeks trying to piece together the fragments of what we had found. What I'm about to share is a deeper dive into the investigation that followed our discovery. Back home, I reached out to a few trusted colleagues, careful not to reveal too much. I knew that if word got out, the academic community would be in an uproar, and possibly worse, someone might try to silence us. John and I meticulously cataloged every artifact and document we had managed to bring back. The stone tablet with the microscopic artifacts was the first item we analyzed. Using a high-powered microscope, we discovered that the tiny mechanical parts embedded in the tablet were incredibly advanced. They resembled nanotechnology, something that shouldn't have existed millions of years ago. How could a civilization that predates known history possess such technology? The implications were mind-boggling. I sent samples of the metals and materials to a lab for further analysis. The results came back inconclusive, which only added to the mystery. The composition of the materials didn't match anything known to modern science. It was as if they were crafted from elements not found on Earth. The parchment John had found also proved to be a treasure trove of information. Although we couldn't translate the language, the drawings provided significant clues. One image depicted a ritual where the elongated skulls were being worshipped by human-like figures. The glowing symbols in the drawings seemed to match the ones we had seen in the tunnels. Intrigued, I decided to reach out to an expert in ancient languages and cryptography, Dr. Emily Carter. Emily was skeptical at first, but agreed to meet after seeing the photos. When she finally laid eyes on the artifacts, her skepticism turned into fascination. "This is unlike anything I've ever seen," she said, examining the parchment under a magnifying glass. "These symbols, they resemble ancient Sumerian cuneiform, but there are elements here that are completely foreign." Over the next few weeks, Emily and I worked tirelessly to decode the symbols. We cross-referenced them with known ancient scripts and mythological texts. Slowly, a pattern began to emerge. The symbols weren't just a language. They were a form of advanced mathematical equations and star charts. It seemed that this ancient civilization had a profound understanding of astronomy and possibly even space travel. Meanwhile, John was researching the elongated skulls. He found historical records of similar skulls discovered in Peru, Egypt, and other parts of the world. These were often attributed to intentional cranial deformation, but the ones we found were different. The bone structure suggested they were naturally elongated, indicating a different species altogether. One night, as we were deep into our research, I received a call from an unknown number. The voice on the other end was calm but firm. "Stop your investigation. There are forces at play that you don't understand." Before I could respond, the line went dead. I tried to trace the call but had no luck. Shaken but undeterred, I decided to increase our security measures. I installed cameras around my house and made sure our research was backed up in multiple secure locations. A few days later, Emily made a breakthrough. She managed to partially translate a section of the parchment. It spoke of a race of beings called the Elohim, who came from the stars. They were revered as gods and brought knowledge and technology to early humans. The text also hinted at a catastrophic event that led to their downfall and a deliberate effort to erase their existence from history. The more we uncovered, the more questions arose. Why had this history been hidden? Who were the Elohim and what happened to them? And most importantly, why were we being warned to stop our investigation? In an attempt to find more answers, I decided to revisit the site. This time I planned to be more prepared. John agreed to join me again, and Emily, despite her initial reluctance, decided to come along as well. She believed there was more to be discovered in those tunnels, possibly more documents or artifacts that could provide the answers we sought. We made discreet arrangements and returned to Eastern Europe. The journey was uneventful until we reached the forest. The oppressive atmosphere was still there, and as we approached the site, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. This time, we brought more sophisticated equipment. Ground-penetrating radar revealed a complex network of tunnels and chambers beneath the ruins. As we prepared to descend, I noticed something odd. Fresh footprints leading into the main tunnel. Someone had been here since we left. Cautiously, we made our way inside. The deeper we went, the colder and darker it became. The chanting we had heard before seemed to echo faintly in the distance, but this time it was accompanied by a low hum, like machinery. In one of the deeper chambers, we found more artifacts, including a set of tablets that appeared to be records of the Elohim's teachings and technology. Emily was ecstatic, snapping photos and taking notes, while John and I explored further. In a hidden alcove, we discovered what appeared to be a control room. There were remnants of machines and devices far beyond our current understanding. Screens with unfamiliar symbols flickered to life as we entered, displaying star charts and strange alien landscapes. Suddenly the hum grew louder, and the ground began to shake. We had triggered something. We grabbed what we could and made a hasty retreat. But as we exited the tunnel, a blinding light enveloped us. When it faded, we found ourselves back in the forest, the entrance to the tunnel sealed shut behind us. We were shaken but alive. We had uncovered pieces of a puzzle that suggested a hidden chapter of human history, one that someone or something wanted to remain buried. We had to be careful with what we revealed and to whom. Back home, we continued our research in secret, piecing together the fragments of the story. We knew we were being watched, but we couldn't stop. The truth was too important. In my next post, I'll share the details of our findings and the theories we've developed about the Elohim and their influence on human history. Stay tuned. And please, if anyone out there has information or experiences related to this, reach out. We need all the help we can get. I've been inundated with messages and theories from many of you, and it's heartening to see how many people are intrigued by our findings. As promised, here's the next part of our journey, filled with revelations that have only deepened the mystery. Back in the safety of our homes, we analyzed the artifacts and documents we had brought back from our second trip. Emily worked tirelessly on translating the newly discovered tablets, while John and I focused on the technological aspects of the relics we found in the control room. What we uncovered was nothing short of astonishing. Emily's translations revealed that the Elohim had not only visited Earth, but had actively participated in shaping early human civilizations. According to the texts, they had imparted knowledge in various fields, including agriculture, medicine, and even rudimentary forms of technology. The tablets described how the Elohim taught early humans to build monumental structures aligned with celestial bodies, which explained the advanced architectural feats of ancient cultures like the Egyptians and the Mayans. But the most shocking revelation was the mention of a great cataclysm. The text spoke of a cosmic event that threatened to annihilate both the Elohim and humanity. It seemed this event had been prophesied, and that the Elohim had tried to prepare humans for it by imparting their knowledge and creating safe havens around the world. However, the specifics of the cataclysm were vague, shrouded in cryptic references to a dark star and a cosmic war. Meanwhile, John made a breakthrough with the mechanical parts embedded in the stone tablet. Using advanced imaging techniques, he discovered that the parts formed a complex, three-dimensional map when viewed from a certain angle. This map depicted not only the layout of the underground ruins, but also other locations around the world marked with similar ruins. It was a global network, suggesting that the Elohim had established multiple sites across different continents. Determined to validate our findings, I decided to reach out to a geologist friend, Dr. Laura Martinez, to analyze the composition of the metals we found. She was skeptical at first, but became intrigued after examining the samples. Her tests confirmed that the materials were indeed unknown to modern science and hinted at an extraterrestrial origin. As we pieced together these clues, we realized that our understanding of human history was fundamentally flawed. The Elohim had played a pivotal role in our development, and their legacy was scattered across the globe, hidden in plain sight. But why was this history erased? And by whom? One evening, as we were deep in discussion, my phone buzzed with a notification. It was an email from an anonymous sender containing coordinates and a cryptic message. "Seek, and you shall find. They are closer than you think." The coordinates pointed to a remote area in South America, close to the Nazca lines in Peru. This location aligned with one of the marks on John's 3D map. Despite the warnings and the dangers, we decided to follow the lead. We knew we had to be discreet. This time, we contacted a trusted explorer, Diego, who had extensive knowledge of the region. We flew to Peru under the guise of a regular archaeological expedition and made our way to the coordinates. Upon arrival, Diego led us to a secluded area away from the usual tourist spots. The landscape was barren and rugged, but there was an undeniable sense of significance about the place. Using ground-penetrating radar, we quickly located an entrance to an underground chamber, similar to the tunnels we had explored in Eastern Europe. The chamber was vast, filled with more artifacts and inscriptions, but the most startling discovery was a set of large stone slabs arranged in a circle. Each slab was inscribed with detailed star charts and more of the mysterious symbols we had come to recognize. At the center of the circle was a pedestal, and on it an object that looked like a crystalline orb. Emily carefully approached the pedestal and began examining the orb. It seemed to hum with a faint energy, resonating with the symbols on the slabs. As she touched it, the symbols began to glow, and the chamber filled with a soft, ethereal light. The orb projected a holographic image of the night sky, pinpointing specific constellations and celestial events. One constellation stood out, a formation resembling the ancient symbol of the Elohim. The projection zoomed in, revealing a hidden star system with a faint red dwarf star at its center. Emily gasped. "This must be the dark star mentioned in the texts. It's real." Suddenly, the orb's light dimmed, and the projection faded. The air grew cold, and we heard the now familiar chanting, echoing through the chamber. We realized we had triggered something again, something that didn't want us to uncover these secrets. We quickly gathered what we could and exited the chamber. Outside, the landscape seemed to shift and blur, as if reality itself was unstable. We felt a presence watching us, an ancient and powerful force. We hurried back to our camp, packed our belongings, and left the site. Back home, we analyzed our findings. The star system projected by the orb was real, and the dark star might be connected to the Great Cataclysm. The evidence pointed to an advanced civilization that had not only influenced humanity, but had also left a cosmic warning. As we delve deeper into this mystery, I can't shake the feeling that we're being watched. We're uncovering truths that have been hidden for millennia, and someone or something doesn't want us to succeed. The implications of our discoveries are staggering, and the danger is very real. In my next post, I'll share our plans to explore the remaining locations on the map and what we hope to find. This journey is far from over, and I need all the help I can get. If you have any information or theories, please reach out. We're on the brink of something monumental, and together, we might just uncover the truth. I'm back with another update, and things have gotten even more intense since my last post. We've been working around the clock to decipher the clues and connect the dots. The discoveries we've made have brought us closer to understanding the truth, but they've also led us into deeper, more dangerous territory. After returning from Peru, we took some time to analyze the holographic projection of the star system. Emily cross-referenced the constellation with various ancient texts and star charts, and she discovered something incredible. The configuration of stars matched records from multiple ancient civilizations, including the Egyptians, the Mayans, and even the Sumerians. It seemed that these cultures had knowledge of this distant star system and had encoded it into their monuments and artifacts. We decided our next step was to investigate another location marked on John's 3D map, this time in the deserts of Egypt. The location was near the Great Pyramid of Giza, but in a less explored area. We contacted an old friend, Dr. Ahmed Hassan, an Egyptologist with access to restricted archaeological sites. With his help, we managed to gain permission to conduct a discreet excavation. When we arrived, the heat was oppressive, but the sense of anticipation kept us going. Using the ground-penetrating radar, we located a subterranean chamber beneath the sand. The entrance was hidden behind a wall of sandstone covered in hieroglyphs that Emily quickly began to translate. The hieroglyphs told a story of gods who came from the stars, bringing knowledge and civilization to the early Egyptians. They described a time when these gods ruled alongside the pharaohs and imparted wisdom that would ensure the survival of humanity through an impending disaster. As we broke through the sandstone wall, we uncovered a staircase leading down into the darkness. The air inside was stale and cold, a stark contrast to the scorching desert above. Descending the steps, we found ourselves in a large chamber adorned with carvings and artifacts similar to those we had found in Peru. At the center of the chamber was a large stone table, upon which lay a set of intricate golden tools and another crystalline orb. This orb, however, was slightly different. It was embedded with small gem-like structures that glowed faintly in the dim light. As Emily approached it, the orb activated, projecting another star chart, this time showing a different part of the sky. John and I examined the golden tools, which seemed to be a set of advanced surgical instruments. Their craftsmanship was beyond anything the ancient Egyptians could have achieved. It was clear that these tools were left by the Elohim, possibly used in their rituals or for advanced medical procedures. Suddenly, Emily gasped and called us over. The star chart had shifted to display a series of symbols and equations that we recognized from the tablets in Eastern Europe. It appeared to be a set of instructions or a guide, but we couldn't decipher it fully. As we continued our investigation, we uncovered more documents, including a papyrus scroll detailing the construction of the pyramids. The scroll claimed that the pyramids were not just tombs, but also served as energy collectors, harnessing power from the stars to protect against the Great Cataclysm. This aligned with the theory that the pyramids were part of a global network designed by the Elohim. Before we could delve deeper, we heard a rumbling noise from above. Dust and sand began to fall from the ceiling, and we realized we had triggered another mechanism. We hurriedly gathered the documents and the orb, retreating to the surface just as the chamber began to collapse. Back at our base camp, we reviewed our findings. The star chart and the instructions were crucial pieces of the puzzle, suggesting a coordinated effort by the Elohim to protect humanity. But protect us from what? The cryptic references to a cosmic war and a dark star hinted at a larger conflict, possibly interstellar. Our next destination was the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico, another location marked on the map. This site was near the ancient Mayan city of Chichen Itza. We contacted local archaeologists and secured permission to explore a lesser-known pyramid deep in the jungle. Upon arrival, we found the pyramid partially buried under centuries of vegetation. The structure was covered in carvings of serpent gods and celestial symbols. As we cleared the entrance, we felt the weight of history pressing down on us. This place held secrets that could rewrite everything we knew about human civilization. Inside the pyramid, we found a labyrinth of tunnels leading to a central chamber. The walls were adorned with carvings depicting the arrival of gods from the stars, just like in Egypt and Peru. At the center of the chamber was a stone altar with another crystalline orb and a series of stone tablets. Emily quickly got to work translating the tablets. They told the story of the Mayan civilization being guided by star gods, who taught them astronomy, mathematics, and advanced engineering. The texts also mentioned a prophecy about the return of these gods and a great celestial event that would change the world. As Emily translated, John and I examined the orb. This one projected not just star charts, but also moving images of celestial bodies and cosmic events. We saw what appeared to be a massive explosion in space, sending shockwaves across the galaxy. The images were accompanied by symbols and equations we couldn't understand, but it was clear they were significant. Suddenly, the orb's projection changed, showing a map of Earth with glowing points marking various locations. These points aligned with the sites we had visited and others we had yet to explore. It seemed the Elohim had created a network of power centers around the world, all connected and activated by celestial alignments. Before we could analyze further, we heard the now familiar chanting echoing through the tunnels. The walls began to shake, and we knew we had to leave. We gathered the tablets and the orb and made our way back to the surface, just as the entrance to the pyramid collapsed behind us. Back home, we pieced together our findings. The evidence pointed to a coordinated effort by the Elohim to prepare humanity for a cosmic event. The star charts, the tools, and the network of power centers all suggested a grand design, one that had been hidden for millennia. In my next post, I'll share our plans to explore the remaining locations and what we hope to uncover. The truth is out there, and we're getting closer to understanding it. If you have any information or theories, please reach out. This journey is far from over, and we need all the help we can get to uncover the truth about the Elohim and their impact on our history. Thank you for staying with me through this incredible journey. Your support and insights have been invaluable. Here's the final part of our story, where we uncovered the ultimate truth about the Elohim and the hidden history of humanity. After our expedition in Mexico, we decided to investigate the final locations on John's 3D map. The coordinates pointed us to a remote area in Antarctica and an isolated island in the Pacific Ocean. We knew these would be the most challenging expeditions yet, but we had come too far to turn back. First, we tackled Antarctica. We joined an international research team that was studying climate change effects on the ice. With their help, we secured transport to the coordinates marked on the map. The freezing temperatures and harsh conditions made it a daunting task, but we pressed on, driven by the need to uncover the truth. When we reached the coordinates, we used ground-penetrating radar to locate what appeared to be a large structure buried deep beneath the ice. It took days of careful excavation, but we eventually revealed the entrance to an underground complex. Inside, we found a series of chambers filled with artifacts and carvings, similar to those we had discovered in other parts of the world. The air was frigid, but the carvings depicted scenes of warmth and light, an oasis in the frozen wilderness. The central chamber contained another crystalline orb, this one larger and more complex than the others. Emily immediately began translating the inscriptions, which spoke of a sanctuary built by the Elohim to survive the Great Cataclysm. According to the texts, this facility was designed to monitor celestial events and serve as a final refuge for humanity in case of global disaster. The orb projected a holographic display, showing the same star system with the dark star, but this time with additional details about its trajectory and potential impact on Earth. As we explored further, we found records of the Elohim's departure from Earth. The texts described their decision to leave, fearing the impending cosmic event would annihilate their advanced civilization. They left behind a network of sites, like the one we stood in, to guide humanity and preserve their knowledge. The implications were staggering. The Elohim had not only influenced early human civilizations, but had also planned for our survival long after they were gone. We gathered as much data as we could and prepared for our next and final expedition to the isolated island in the Pacific. The island was even more challenging to access than Antarctica. We chartered a boat and navigated through treacherous waters, finally arriving at a place untouched by modern civilization. The dense jungle concealed the entrance to another underground complex, similar in design to the others but with a distinct tropical theme. Inside, we discovered more carvings and artifacts, along with another crystalline orb. This one, however, was different. It seemed to be the central control for the entire network of sites. Emily's translations revealed that this island was the primary hub where the Elohim had coordinated their efforts and monitored the global network. The orb here projected a comprehensive map linking all the sites we had visited and showing how they were interconnected. It also displayed a countdown, indicating the time remaining until the next significant celestial event. According to the projection, the event was imminent, and the network needed to be activated to protect the planet. We realized we were on the brink of something monumental. The Elohim's network was designed to shield Earth from cosmic threats, but it required activation. The orb provided instructions, detailing how to align the various sites and channels the celestial energy through them. We contacted our colleagues around the world, instructing them on how to activate the sites. It was a race against time, but with their help, we managed to synchronize the network just as the countdown reached 0. As the celestial event began, the network sprang to life. The orbs at each site glowed, and beams of light connected them, creating a protective shield around the planet. The skies lit up with a spectacular display of cosmic energy, and for a moment, it felt as if the heavens themselves were aligning to protect us. The event passed without incident, and the network powered down, having fulfilled its purpose. The Elohim's legacy had saved humanity once again, just as they had planned millennia ago. Our journey had uncovered the truth about an ancient civilization that had guided and protected humanity through the ages. The Elohim were not just myths or gods, but advanced beings who had left behind a network to ensure our survival. As we returned home, we knew our findings would revolutionize our understanding of history. We had a duty to share this knowledge with the world, but we also understood the need to protect it from those who might misuse it. We published our findings in a series of academic papers, carefully omitting the most sensitive details. The world deserved to know the truth, but we had to ensure it was revealed responsibly. This journey has changed us all. We've seen things that defy explanation and uncovered secrets that were meant to remain hidden. But above all, we've learned that humanity is part of a much larger cosmic tapestry, guided and protected by forces beyond our understanding. Thank you for following our story. Stay curious, stay vigilant, and remember that the truth is out there, waiting to be discovered. If you ever find yourself on a path that leads to the unknown, don't be afraid to follow it. You never know what incredible discoveries await you. I was desperate to get away from my family. The constant arguments, the suffocating expectations, it was all too much. I wanted out, and fast. So, I did what any sensible person wouldn't do. I started browsing the dark web for job opportunities. It sounds ridiculous, I know, but I was desperate and out of options. I stumbled upon a posting that seemed almost too good to be true. A job at a small store in a remote town, all expenses paid, with free accommodation. It was 3,000 miles away from home. Perfect. The journey was long and grueling. 3 flights and a bus ride later, I found myself in a place that could only be described as the middle of nowhere. The town, if you could even call it that, had a population of maybe a few dozen people, tops. The store was the only notable landmark. It looked like it hadn't been renovated since the 70s, with faded signage and a creaky wooden porch. The first thing I noticed when I arrived was the eerie silence. There were no birds chirping, no distant sounds of cars, just an unsettling, pervasive quiet. The air felt thick, almost suffocating. My phone had no signal, but I had expected that. What I hadn't expected was the complete lack of any modern amenities. There was no Wi-Fi, no cable TV, nothing to connect me to the outside world. I was greeted by Mr. Thompson, the store owner, who was a wiry old man with a permanent scowl etched into his face. He handed me a set of keys and grunted, "You'll be living in the apartment above the store. Your shift starts at 8 a.m. sharp. Don't be late." With that, he turned and shuffled back into the store, leaving me to lug my suitcase up the narrow staircase to my new home. The apartment was small but functional. A kitchenette, a tiny bathroom, and a bedroom that barely fit a single bed and a dresser. It was dusty with a faint smell of mildew, but I didn't care. It was freedom. My first night was uneventful, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I chalked it up to nerves and exhaustion. The next morning, I reported to the store at 8 a.m. as instructed. Mr. Thompson gave me a brief rundown of my duties: stock the shelves, man the register, and keep the place clean. Simple enough. The customers were strange. They were all eerily quiet, never making eye contact, and always paying in cash. There was a woman who came in every morning at precisely 9 a.m. to buy a single can of tomato soup. She never spoke a word. Then there was the man who stood in the corner for hours, not buying anything, just staring. When I asked Mr. Thompson about him, he just shrugged and said, "He's harmless." As the days passed, I started to notice more oddities. The store's phone would ring at exactly 3:33 p.m. every day, but there was never anyone on the other end. Items would move on their own, nothing drastic, just enough to make me second-guess myself. The lights would flicker, and there were cold spots in random areas of the store. One night, as I was closing up, I heard a faint tapping sound coming from the basement. I had been told never to go down there. It was off-limits, according to Mr. Thompson, but curiosity got the better of me. I grabbed a flashlight and slowly made my way down the rickety wooden stairs. The basement was a cluttered mess of old boxes, broken furniture, and a thick layer of dust. The tapping sound grew louder as I ventured deeper into the darkness. My flashlight beam landed on a large wooden crate in the far corner. The tapping was coming from inside. My heart pounded as I approached it. I hesitated for a moment, then pried the lid off with a crowbar I found nearby. Inside the crate was an old, tattered doll. Its porcelain face was cracked, and one of its glass eyes was missing. The tapping had stopped. I reached in to pick it up, and the moment my fingers touched the doll, I felt a cold, clammy hand on my shoulder. I spun around, but there was no one there. I dropped the doll and bolted up the stairs, slamming the basement door behind me. I was breathing heavily, my mind racing. What was that? I decided to confront Mr. Thompson the next morning. When I did, he just looked at me with those cold, dead eyes and said, "I told you the basement was off limits." The rest of the day passed in a blur. The strange customers, the phone calls, the flickering lights, everything seemed to be intensifying. That night I barricaded myself in my apartment, determined to get some answers. I couldn't leave. There was no way to contact anyone, and the nearest town was miles away. As I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I heard the tapping sound again. This time, it was coming from directly beneath me. I knew it was the basement. I knew something was very, very wrong. I had wanted to escape my family, but now I was trapped in a nightmare, and I had no idea how to get out. I barely slept that night, the tapping sound echoing in my mind. When dawn finally broke, I felt a strange mix of determination and dread. I had to figure out what was going on in this place. I couldn't leave, and ignoring the problem wasn't an option anymore. I decided to start with the customers. There was something off about them, something that made my skin crawl. The woman with the tomato soup was first. She arrived, as usual, at 9 a.m. sharp. I mustered up the courage to ask her a question as I handed her the can. "Excuse me, ma'am, do you live around here?" I asked, trying to sound casual. She looked at me for the first time, her eyes dull and lifeless. "Yes," she replied in a monotone voice, then turned and walked out without another word. I watched her leave, a chill running down my spine. It was as if she was in a trance. Next was the man who stood in the corner. He was already there when I opened the store. He didn't buy anything, just stared. I approached him cautiously. "Can I help you with something?" I asked, forcing a smile. He didn't respond. He didn't even blink. I waved a hand in front of his face, but there was no reaction. It was like he wasn't really there. Defeated, I went back to the counter, glancing at him every now and then, hoping for some sign of life. But there was nothing. The day dragged on with its usual strangeness. The flickering lights, the cold spots, and the daily 3:33 p.m. phone call with no one on the other end. As evening approached, I found myself dreading the night. The thought of hearing that tapping sound again filled me with fear, but I knew I had to confront it. After closing up, I decided to investigate the basement further. This time, I armed myself with a heavy flashlight and a sense of resolve. I descended the stairs, my heart pounding with each step. The basement was just as I had left it, cluttered and dusty. I approached the crate where I had found the doll, but this time it was empty. The doll was gone. I felt a sudden intense cold wash over me, and the tapping sound started again. It was louder now, more insistent. It seemed to be coming from behind a stack of old boxes. I moved them aside, revealing a small door hidden in the wall. It was padlocked. My hands were shaking as I fumbled with the lock. I didn't have a key, but I found a rusty old crowbar among the junk. It took several attempts, but I finally managed to break the lock. I took a deep breath and opened the door. Behind it was a narrow passage leading deeper underground. The air was musty and stale, and the walls were lined with what looked like old newspapers and yellowed photographs. I shone my flashlight on them, trying to make out the images. They were pictures of people, townsfolk, I assumed, but their eyes were scratched out, and their faces were twisted in expressions of terror. I pressed on, the passage narrowing until I had to crouch to move forward. The tapping grew louder, echoing off the walls. It led me to a small, dimly lit room. In the center of the room was an old wooden table, and on it, a box similar to the one I had found the doll in. With a sense of foreboding, I opened the box. Inside were more dolls, each one eerily lifelike, dressed in clothes that looked disturbingly familiar. As I examined them, I realized with horror that they resembled the townsfolk. The woman with the tomato soup, the man who stood in the corner, their faces were replicated in porcelain, cracked and lifeless. Suddenly, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned to see Mr. Thompson standing in the doorway, his face twisted in an expression I had never seen before. He looked furious. "You shouldn't be here," he growled, stepping into the room. "This place is off limits." I backed away, my mind racing. "What is this place? What's going on here?" I demanded. Mr. Thompson's expression softened, almost to sadness. "It's too late for you to understand. You should have stayed upstairs." Before I could react, he grabbed my arm and dragged me back up the passage. He shoved me into the basement and locked the door behind us. "Go to your apartment," he ordered, his voice cold, "and stay there." I ran up the stairs, my heart pounding. Once in my apartment, I locked the door and pushed the dresser in front of it. I couldn't stop shaking. What had I stumbled upon? What were those dolls? I knew one thing for sure. I was in way over my head, and I had no idea how to get out. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of dread. My encounter with Mr. Thompson in the basement had left me shaken. I needed answers, but I had to be cautious. The townsfolk, the dolls, the tapping, everything was connected, and I was determined to find out how. I decided to take a different approach. Instead of confronting the townspeople directly, I would observe them more closely, looking for patterns or clues. I started with the woman who bought the tomato soup. She was punctual as ever, arriving at 9 a.m. sharp. This time I watched her as she left the store. She walked with a mechanical precision, her steps perfectly timed. I followed her at a distance, making sure not to be seen. She headed to a small house on the outskirts of town. The house looked abandoned, with peeling paint and overgrown weeds in the yard. She entered without hesitation. I waited a few minutes before approaching the house. Peeking through a window, I saw her standing in the middle of a room, staring at a blank wall. She didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there, motionless. It was unsettling, to say the least. I left the house, my mind racing. Something was definitely wrong with these people. They were like puppets going through the motions of daily life without any real awareness. I needed more information, so I decided to visit the local library. The library was a small, dusty building near the center of town. It looked like it hadn't been updated in decades, with shelves full of old, worn-out books. The librarian, Mrs. Whitaker, was an elderly woman with kind eyes and a warm smile. She seemed normal, which was a welcome change. "Can I help you with something, dear?" she asked as I entered. "Yes, actually," I replied, trying to sound casual. "I'm new in town and was wondering if you have any historical records or information about the place." Mrs. Whitaker's smile faded slightly. "We don't get many visitors interested in our history," she said, leading me to a back room. "But we do have some old records and newspapers that might be of interest." I spent hours poring over the old documents. The town had a strange history, full of unexplained disappearances and mysterious events. There were stories of people vanishing without a trace, only to reappear years later with no memory of where they had been. There were also accounts of odd phenomena, lights in the sky, strange sounds, and inexplicable cold spots. One article in particular caught my attention. It was about a fire that had destroyed a large portion of the town many years ago. According to the report, the fire started in the very basement where I had found the dolls. Several people were killed, and those who survived were never the same. They became withdrawn, almost lifeless, just like the townsfolk I had encountered. As I read, a chill ran down my spine. Could the fire be connected to the dolls and the strange behavior of the people here? I needed to know more. I decided to visit the local cemetery, hoping to find some clues among the graves of those who had perished in the fire. The cemetery was on the edge of town, surrounded by a rusted iron fence. The graves were old, the headstones worn and weathered. As I walked among them, I noticed something peculiar. Many of the graves had the same date of death, corresponding to the time of the fire. One grave in particular stood out. It was marked with a simple headstone bearing the name Emily Thompson. The date matched the fire, and the last name was the same as Mr. Thompson's. Could she be a relative? I knelt by the grave, brushing away the dirt to read the inscription. It was a simple epitaph. "Beloved daughter, taken too soon." I felt a pang of sadness. Whoever Emily was, she had died tragically, and it seemed to have left a lasting impact on Mr. Thompson. Perhaps the dolls were his way of coping with the loss, a twisted form of remembrance. As I stood up, I noticed something odd. There was a small weathered box partially buried at the foot of the grave. I dug it out and opened it. Inside were more dolls, similar to the ones I had found in the basement. Each doll had a name written on a piece of paper attached to it. Names I recognized: the woman with the tomato soup, the man who stood in the corner, and several others. My heart raced as I realized the significance. These dolls weren't just toys. They were representations of the townspeople, somehow connected to their strange behavior. But how and why? I needed to confront Mr. Thompson again, but I had to be careful. I decided to wait until nightfall, when the store was closed and the streets were empty. As the sun set, I made my way back to the store, determined to get some answers. I crept down to the basement, flashlight in hand. The hidden door was still unlocked, and I ventured down the narrow passage once more. The room with the table and the dolls was as I had left it. I examined the dolls again, looking for any clues I might have missed. That's when I noticed a small, handwritten journal tucked away in a corner of the box. I opened the journal and began to read. It was Mr. Thompson's handwriting, detailing his grief over Emily's death and his desperate attempts to bring her back. He had turned to dark rituals and forbidden practices, using the dolls as vessels to contain the souls of the townsfolk, hoping to revive his daughter. But something had gone horribly wrong. Instead of reviving Emily, he had trapped the souls, leaving the people as empty shells. As I read, a deep sense of horror settled over me. I had to find a way to free the townsfolk and stop whatever Mr. Thompson had started. But first, I had to confront him and make him understand the consequences of his actions. With the journal in hand, I made my way back up to the store, ready to face Mr. Thompson and put an end to the madness once and for all. Armed with Mr. Thompson's journal and a newfound determination, I approached his office, my heart pounding in my chest. I had to be careful. There was no telling how he would react to my discovery. As I opened the door, I found him sitting at his desk, surrounded by stacks of old papers. He looked up, his eyes narrowing as he saw the journal in my hand. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steady despite my nerves. Mr. Thompson's expression darkened. "You've been snooping where you don't belong," he said coldly. "I warned you." "I found your journal," I continued, ignoring his threat. "I know about Emily. I know what you've been doing with the dolls and the townspeople. This has to stop." His face softened for a moment, a flicker of pain crossing his features. "You don't understand," he said, his voice breaking. "I was only trying to bring her back. She was everything to me." I took a step closer, trying to keep my tone gentle. "I get that you're hurting, but what you've done isn't right. The people in this town, they're suffering. They're not themselves anymore. You have to let them go." Mr. Thompson shook his head, tears welling up in his eyes. "I can't. I don't know how. The ritual. It was supposed to work, but it went wrong. And now I'm trapped, just like they are." I felt a pang of sympathy for the old man. He was clearly tormented by his loss and the unintended consequences of his actions. "Maybe we can figure this out together," I suggested. "There has to be a way to reverse it." He hesitated, then nodded slowly. "The ritual. It's in the journal. Maybe if we perform it again, we can set things right." Together we pored over the journal, deciphering the complex instructions for the ritual. It required specific items, some of which were already in the basement and others we had to gather from around town. We spent the next few hours collecting everything we needed: candles, herbs, and a strange, intricately carved stone that Mr. Thompson kept locked in a cabinet. As midnight approached, we set up the ritual space in the basement. The dolls were placed in a circle with the stone in the center. Mr. Thompson lit the candles and began to chant in a language I didn't recognize. I stood beside him, my nerves on edge, hoping against hope that this would work. The air grew cold, and a strange energy filled the room. The dolls seemed to come alive, their eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. The chanting grew louder, more intense, and I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Suddenly there was a blinding flash of light, and the room went silent. For a moment I thought we had failed, but then, one by one, The dolls began to crumble to dust. The energy in the room dissipated and the coldness lifted. Mr. Thompson collapsed to his knees, tears streaming down his face. "It's over," he whispered. "They're free." I helped him to his feet, and we made our way back upstairs. As we stepped outside, I saw the townspeople emerging from their homes looking dazed but alive. The woman with the tomato soup, the man who stood in the corner, they all seemed to be waking from a long, dark dream. Mr. Thompson and I exchanged a look of relief. The nightmare was finally over. The townsfolk were themselves again, and the eerie silence that had plagued the town was replaced with the sounds of life and conversation. People were talking, hugging, and crying tears of joy. In the days that followed, the town began to heal. The strange occurrences stopped, and the people started to return to their normal routines. The store became a hub of activity, with customers coming in not just to buy things, but to share their stories and reconnect with one another. Mr. Thompson, though still mourning his daughter, seemed lighter, as if a great weight had been lifted from his shoulders. He thanked me for helping him, for giving him a chance to make things right. As for me, I realized that running away from my problems had led me to a place where I could make a real difference. I decided to stay in the town, helping out at the store and getting to know the people. They were no longer strange or eerie, they were just like me, looking for a fresh start. Life in the middle of nowhere turned out to be exactly what I needed. It was peaceful, fulfilling, and most importantly, it was home. Life in the town settled into a comforting routine. The townsfolk, now free from their trance-like states, were friendly and warm. I became part of the community, helping out at the store and even participating in town events. The strange occurrences had ceased, and the eerie silence was replaced with laughter and chatter. It felt like a fresh start for everyone. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, casting a golden glow over the town, Mr. Thompson called me into his office. He looked different, lighter, more at peace. He gestured for me to sit and handed me a cup of tea. "There's something I need to tell you," he began, his voice steady. "Something I couldn't explain before." I leaned in, curious. "What is it?" Mr. Thompson sighed and looked out the window. "After Emily died in the fire, I was consumed by grief. I couldn't accept it. I found an old book in the attic, filled with rituals and spells. Desperate, I performed a ritual to bring her back. I didn't understand the consequences at the time. The ritual didn't bring Emily back. Instead, it bound the souls of the townspeople to the dolls, trapping them in a state between life and death. I listened, feeling a mix of sorrow and understanding. "But we reversed it, didn't we? They're free now." He nodded. "Yes, we freed them. But there's more to the story. The ritual not only trapped the townspeople, it also drew something else here, a dark presence. It's been lingering ever since, feeding off the trapped souls. When we performed the reversal, I felt it leave. The town is truly free now, but there's one last thing I need to do." He handed me a small leather-bound book. "This is the book I found. It contains dangerous knowledge. I need you to take it far away from here and destroy it. I can't risk anyone else finding it and making the same mistakes I did." I took the book, feeling its weight in my hands. "I understand. I'll make sure it's destroyed." The next morning I packed my things and prepared to leave. The townsfolk gathered to say goodbye, their faces filled with gratitude. Mrs. Whitaker handed me a small basket of homemade cookies for the journey. The woman who bought tomato soup every day gave me a warm hug, her eyes finally full of life. As I walked to the bus stop, Mr. Thompson stood beside me, his eyes reflecting a mix of sadness and relief. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for everything." I nodded, feeling a lump in my throat. "Take care of yourself, Mr. Thompson, and take care of the town." The bus ride was long, giving me plenty of time to think. The book sat in my bag, a reminder of the strange and terrifying journey I had been on. I knew what I had to do. After several days of travel, I reached a secluded spot in the mountains, far from any town or village. I built a small fire and with a sense of finality tossed the book into the flames. As it burned, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The dark chapter was finally over. I returned to my hometown, but things were different now. I had changed. The experience had given me a new perspective on life and a sense of purpose. I reconnected with my family, mending old wounds and building new bridges. I told them about my time in the remote town, leaving out the darker details, and they listened with a mix of amazement and disbelief. Months passed, and I found myself missing the little store and the people I had come to care about. One day, I received a letter from Mr. Thompson. He wrote about the town's progress and how everyone was thriving. He also mentioned that the store was busier than ever, and they could use an extra hand if I was interested. With a smile, I packed my bags once again. The small town in the middle of nowhere had become more than just a place to escape. It had become home, and now it was calling me back. As I boarded the bus, I felt a sense of excitement and peace. The journey had been long and strange, but it had led me to where I belonged, and I couldn't wait to see what the future held in the little store in the middle of nowhere. Hey Reddit, this is my first post, and honestly, I never thought I'd be sharing something like this. I'm just an average college student trying to balance classes and a part-time job at a gas station. But what I'm about to tell you is far from ordinary. So, it all started a few months ago. I was in my sophomore year, drowning in assignments and barely scraping by with my gas station gig. One night, while scrolling through Reddit, I stumbled upon a thread about the dark web. People were sharing stories about all sorts of crazy things they found there. Illegal goods, fake documents, and surprisingly, cheap electronics. Being perpetually broke and in desperate need of a new phone, this piqued my interest. For those who don't know, the dark web isn't something you can just access through a normal browser. You need a special browser called Tor. The whole idea behind Tor is that it bounces your connection around a bunch of different servers to keep you anonymous. Sounds sketchy, right? But curiosity got the better of me. I decided to download Tor and see what all the fuss was about. Setting it up wasn't too difficult. There are plenty of guides online that walk you through the process step by step. Once I had Tor up and running, I was greeted by a very plain, almost retro-looking browser. It felt like stepping into another world, one that was dark and full of secrets. I started by visiting some well-known directories for dark web links, often called hidden wikis. These directories list links to various websites on the dark web, categorized into sections like forums, marketplaces, and information repositories. Browsing through these links was like opening a door to a different dimension. The URLs were just strings of random characters ending in .onion, which added to the eeriness. One of the first things I noticed was the sheer volume of illegal stuff being sold. Drugs, weapons, counterfeit money, you name it. I knew I needed to be careful. Getting involved with the wrong people on the dark web could land me in serious trouble. But I kept digging, hoping to find something more benign, like cheap electronics. Navigating the dark web was unsettling. There were forums where people openly discussed their criminal activities, and marketplaces where you could buy literally anything if you had Bitcoin. The anonymity of it all was both fascinating and terrifying. I felt like I was peering into the darkest corners of human nature. Late one night, I found a marketplace that looked promising. It was called Elysium Electronics. The layout was simple, and it boasted a wide array of smartphones, laptops, and other gadgets at prices that seemed too good to be true. High-end smartphones like iPhones and Samsungs were listed for a fraction of their retail price. I knew it was risky, but the thought of getting a new phone without breaking the bank was too tempting to pass up. I spent hours reading reviews and feedback from other users. Most of the reviews were positive, claiming that the products were legit and the sellers were trustworthy. However, there were also a few horror stories about people getting scammed or receiving bricked devices. I knew I had to be cautious, but the allure of a brand new phone was hard to resist. As I delved deeper into the listings, I noticed something strange. Some of the phone descriptions were oddly specific, mentioning things like untraceable or perfect for privacy. It was as if these devices were tailored for people who wanted to stay off the grid. This should have been a red flag, but I brushed it off, chalking it up to marketing tactics. By the end of the night, I was convinced I was going to buy a phone from the dark web. Little did I know, this decision would lead me down a path of paranoia and danger that I could never have imagined. Hey Reddit, I'm back with the next part of my story. If you read part 1, you'll know that I was diving headfirst into the dark web in search of a cheap phone. What I found instead was a series of events that would change my life forever. After spending several nights lurking around various dark web marketplaces, I kept returning to Elysium Electronics. It seemed like the best bet. With a clean interface and relatively good reviews, I knew I needed to be cautious, so I took my time reading through every detail of the listings. Finally, I found the phone I wanted, a brand new iPhone, the latest model, for a price that seemed almost too good to be true. The next step was to create an account on the site. Unlike regular websites, signing up for dark web marketplaces requires you to use fake credentials. I came up with a pseudonym, set up a burner email, and created a secure password. The whole process made me feel like a spy in a bad movie, but I kept reminding myself that it was all part of the adventure. Once I had my account set up, I started communicating with the seller. His username was something like PhoneMaster23, and his profile boasted hundreds of successful transactions. He was quick to respond to my inquiries, which made me feel a bit more at ease. I asked about the phone's condition, the shipping process, and even if there were any guarantees. He assured me that the phone was in perfect condition and that it would be shipped discreetly. The final hurdle was the payment. Most transactions on the dark web are done using Bitcoin, a digital currency that's nearly impossible to trace. Up until this point, I had never used Bitcoin, so I had to learn the ropes. I spent hours researching how to buy Bitcoin, set up a wallet, and make transactions. It was a steep learning curve, but eventually I managed to purchase a small amount of Bitcoin from a reputable exchange. With my Bitcoin wallet loaded, I returned to Elysium Electronics and initiated the purchase. The process was surprisingly straightforward. I selected the phone, confirmed the shipping address, a P.O. box I had set up to avoid giving out my real address, and clicked the buy button. A QR code appeared on the screen for me to send the payment to. I scanned it with my Bitcoin wallet app and sent the payment. It was done. Now, all I had to do was wait. The next few days were a mix of excitement and anxiety. I checked the tracking information obsessively, watching as the package made its way from an unknown location to my P.O. box. The anticipation was almost unbearable. Every time I heard a knock on my apartment door or a delivery truck outside, my heart would race. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I received a notification that my package had arrived. I rushed to the post office, my mind buzzing with a mix of excitement and fear. What if it was a scam? What if the phone didn't work? Or worse, what if it was some kind of elaborate setup to get me into trouble? I picked up the package, which was surprisingly nondescript. It was a plain brown box with no markings or labels, just my P.O. box number scribbled on the top. I took it home and carefully opened it, half expecting a jack-in-the-box to pop out and laugh at my naivety. But inside, wrapped in layers of bubble wrap, was a brand new iPhone. It looked perfect. I turned it on, and it booted up without a hitch. Everything seemed legit. I couldn't believe my luck. I had just scored a top-of-the-line phone for a fraction of the price. For the next few weeks, I used the phone without any issues. It was fast, reliable, and had all the features I needed. Life was good, or so I thought. Hey Reddit, back again with the third part of my story. If you've been following along, you know that I managed to find a promising dark web marketplace and purchase a new iPhone. What you don't know yet is how that simple transaction would spiral into a nightmare. After receiving my phone and confirming that it worked perfectly, I thought the worst was behind me. But as it turned out, the most challenging part of this entire ordeal wasn't navigating the dark web or setting up Bitcoin. It was what happened next. To backtrack a bit, let me explain how I figured out Bitcoin. I had to learn everything from scratch, starting with setting up a wallet. I chose one of the more reputable options and made sure it was secure. Then, I had to buy Bitcoin, which involved setting up an account on an exchange platform. It was a nerve-wracking process, sending my hard-earned money into what felt like the digital abyss. But eventually, I had enough Bitcoin to make the purchase. The actual transaction was straightforward. I transferred the Bitcoin to the address provided by the seller and got a confirmation message almost immediately. There was a brief moment of relief. Everything seemed to be going smoothly. Over the next few weeks, I used the new iPhone without any issues. It was sleek, fast, and everything I needed. I felt like I had outsmarted the system, snagging a top-tier phone for a fraction of the cost. But then things started to get weird. It began subtly. I'd notice small glitches on my phone, apps would crash for no reason, or the battery would drain unusually fast. At first, I chalked it up to typical tech issues. But then, more disturbing things started to happen. My social media accounts began acting strangely. Posts I didn't remember making, messages sent to people I hadn't contacted in years. I thought maybe I had been hacked, so I changed all my passwords and enabled two-factor authentication. One morning, I logged into my bank account to check my balance and my heart sank. Every cent I had saved was gone. My account was wiped clean. I frantically called the bank, but they couldn't explain how it happened. They suggested I might have fallen for a phishing scam, but I knew better. It had to be connected to that phone. Panic set in. I realized I needed to dig deeper. I started researching everything I could about phone security and dark web scams. It wasn't long before I discovered that compromised phones could be used to track your every move, steal your data, and even spy on you through the camera and microphone. I felt sick to my stomach. I remembered those odd descriptions on the dark web listings, phrases like untraceable and perfect for privacy. Those phones weren't just cheap, they were rigged. They were tools for whoever was on the other end to monitor and exploit the buyers. Things escalated quickly. I began noticing people watching me. It might sound paranoid, but I could swear I was being followed. Unfamiliar faces would appear in places I frequented, outside my apartment, near my job at the gas station, even around campus. It felt like I was living in a surveillance thriller, only it was my life on the line. The final straw came when I received a message on my phone from an unknown number. It simply read, "We know where you are." I was done. I couldn't take the paranoia and fear any longer. Hey Reddit, I'm back with part 4 of my story. If you've been following, you know things were already spiraling out of control. But what happened next took everything to a new level of terror. After receiving that chilling message, "We know where you are," I was in full panic mode. I had to act fast. My first thought was to get rid of the phone. I turned it off and left it at home while I went to the library to use a public computer. I started looking into ways to secure my online presence and protect my remaining accounts. The amount of information out there about digital security is overwhelming, but I needed to learn as much as I could, as fast as I could. One of the first things I did was transfer any remaining funds to a new bank account. I set up new email addresses, updated all my passwords, and started using a password manager. I also enabled two-factor authentication on everything. But no matter how many precautions I took, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was still being watched. Back at my apartment, I decided to dismantle the phone. I didn't just turn it off. I took it apart piece by piece and smashed the components with a hammer. It was therapeutic in a way, but it didn't make the fear go away. I kept wondering what kind of information they had already taken from me. The next few days were a blur of paranoia. I kept seeing those same unfamiliar faces wherever I went. At first, I thought it was just my mind playing tricks on me, but when I saw one of them following me home from work, I knew it was real. I was terrified. I felt like a character in one of those spy movies, constantly looking around like a paranoid rat. I went to the police, but they were skeptical. They took my report, but didn't seem to take me seriously. I couldn't blame them. My story sounded insane, even to me. But I knew what I was experiencing was real. One night, I woke up to the sound of footsteps outside my apartment. My heart was pounding as I crept to the window and peeked through the blinds. There was a man standing on the sidewalk, staring directly at my building. He was there for what felt like hours, just watching. I didn't sleep at all that night. The breaking point came when my college emails were hacked. Personal information, including my home address and schedule, was leaked. I knew I couldn't stay there any longer. I had to leave. I packed a bag with essentials, withdrew what little cash I had left, and called a friend from class. I explained everything in a rush, barely coherent, but he understood enough to let me crash at his place for a few days. During that time, I researched ways to disappear. I found advice on changing identities, moving to a new city, and starting over. It seemed drastic, but I didn't see any other option. I decided to go through with it. I destroyed my remaining digital footprints, deleted social media accounts, and got rid of anything that could be used to track me. I moved to a new city, got a new job, and tried to blend in. The transition was hard, but the constant fear of being watched was worse. I had to keep reminding myself that it was for my safety. Months passed, and the paranoia slowly started to fade. I haven't seen any of those faces since I moved. I'm still careful, paranoid even, but I'm starting to feel like I can breathe again. So here's my warning to all of you. Don't mess around with the dark web. It's not worth it. You think you're getting a deal, but you could end up paying a price far higher than you ever imagined. Be smart, stay safe, and for the love of all things good, don't buy anything from there. Stay tuned for the final part, Part 5, where I'll wrap up my story and share some lessons I've learned from this harrowing experience. If my story can keep even one person from making the same mistake, it's worth it. Hey Reddit, here I am with the final part of my story. It's been a long, terrifying journey, and I hope sharing it can serve as a warning to you. After I moved to a new city and started my life over, things began to settle down. The constant feeling of being watched slowly diminished, and I managed to find a new sense of normalcy. My new job wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills, and I was able to enroll in a different college to continue my education. I kept a low profile and avoided anything that could potentially expose my location or identity. For months, I lived cautiously. I avoided social media, didn't use my real name in public, and was very selective about who I let into my new life. Trust was hard to come by, and every new face made me anxious. I had developed a habit of double-checking locks and looking over my shoulder. It wasn't an ideal way to live, but it was the price I paid for my foray into the dark web. One day, while walking to my new job, I felt someone tap me on the shoulder. My heart skipped a beat as I turned around, but it was just a stranger asking for directions. This small incident made me realize how much fear still controlled my life. I couldn't go on living like this. I needed to reclaim my peace of mind. Slowly, I began to rebuild my life. I started making new friends, cautiously at first. I kept my story to myself, not wanting to scare anyone away with the details of my past. Trust was something that had to be earned, and I took my time letting people in. The process was slow, but gradually I felt more secure in my new surroundings. Through all of this, I learned several important lessons that I want to share with you all. Curiosity can be dangerous. Exploring the unknown can lead to unexpected and often dangerous consequences. The dark web is not a place for casual browsing or bargain hunting. It's a hotbed of illegal activity and malicious individuals who prey on the naive. Digital security is crucial. Understanding how to protect your digital privacy is vital. Use strong, unique passwords. Enable two-factor authentication and be cautious about the information you share online. The digital world is filled with threats that can impact your real life. Value your privacy. Privacy isn't just about avoiding spam emails or annoying ads. It's about protecting your identity, your personal information, and your peace of mind. Once compromised, it's incredibly difficult to regain. Seek help when needed. If you ever find yourself in a situation where you feel threatened or overwhelmed, don't hesitate to seek help. Whether it's from friends, family, or professionals, support systems are there for a reason. Stay away from the dark web. This cannot be stressed enough. The dark web is not a playground. The risks far outweigh any perceived benefits. Stay on the surface web where things are safer and more regulated. Looking back, I can see how my actions led me down a path of paranoia and danger. I was lucky to escape with only financial loss and a shattered sense of security. It could have been much worse. As I wrap up my story, I want to leave you with this. Be smart, be cautious, and never underestimate the dangers that you can find in the shadows of the internet, or in other words, on the dark or the so-called deep web. My experience was a wake-up call, and I hope it serves as one for you too. Stay safe, Reddit, and think twice before you venture into places where few dare to go. Hey Reddit, I've got a story to share. It's not one of those typical creepypastas, but I swear it's 100% real. I don't usually post on here, but I need to get this off my chest. Let me take you back to that night. A night I regret more than anything. It was a Friday, and I had just wrapped up an exhausting week at work. I work in IT, so my days are usually spent fixing other people's tech issues, and by the end of the week, I'm completely drained. This particular Friday, I got home later than usual because a server crashed at the last minute, and I had to stay and fix it. By the time I got home, it was almost midnight. My apartment was quiet, the kind of quiet that's almost too loud if you know what I mean. My cat, Whiskers, greeted me at the door with her usual purrs and demands for food. I fed her, made myself a quick sandwich, and plopped down in front of my computer. I needed to unwind, and my usual go-to was browsing the web, maybe watching some YouTube or catching up on Reddit. But that night, for some reason, I had the urge to venture back into the dark web. I hadn't done it in years, not since college when my friends and I would explore it out of sheer curiosity. It was like a rite of passage, something to do for the thrill. I remember we'd find weird marketplaces, bizarre chat rooms, and other strange corners of the internet. But after a few unsettling experiences, I swore it off. However, tonight, the idea intrigued me. Maybe it was the exhaustion or the need for a distraction, but I decided to dive back in. I fired up my Tor browser and began navigating the familiar yet foreign landscape of the dark web. It was like riding a bike. The steps came back to me effortlessly. I started with some random browsing, clicking through links that led nowhere, and skimming through pages of nonsense. Most of it was boring, just a bunch of outdated forums and marketplaces selling dubious products. After about an hour of this, I stumbled upon a chat room. Its name was simple, just a string of numbers and letters, nothing that stood out. But I clicked on it anyway. The chat room was bustling, filled with anonymous users throwing around conversations in different languages. It was chaotic, a mess of text that was hard to follow. I scanned through the messages, seeing the usual dark web banter, discussions about cryptocurrencies, tips on staying anonymous, conspiracy theories, and the occasional illegal activity. I should have logged off right then. I should have closed the browser and gone to bed. But instead, I felt a strange pull to stay. Something about the anonymity, the chaos, it fascinated me. So I sat there, watching the conversations unfold, letting the minutes tick by. At some point, I noticed a thread of messages that seemed different. They were talking about hacking, but not just your usual run-of-the-mill stuff. These guys were discussing serious breaches like infiltrating secure networks and taking down entire systems. It was disturbing, but I couldn't look away. I was intrigued by the level of skill and audacity these people had. I kept reading, feeling a mix of horror and fascination. It was like watching a car crash. You know you shouldn't be looking, but you can't help it. As the clock crept past 1 a.m., I decided to finally interact. Maybe it was the fatigue, or maybe it was a reckless sense of curiosity, but I typed my first message into the chat. And that, my friends, is where things started to go horribly wrong. Alright, here's where things start to get really messed up. So there I was, sitting in that dark web chat room, my fingers hovering over the keyboard, debating whether or not to hit enter. Against my better judgment, I decided to engage. I started with something simple like, "Hey, what's up?" Nobody responded. It was a crowded chat room, and my message probably got lost in the sea of text. So I tried again, but this time I decided to be a bit more provocative. I typed, "Wow, you guys are really pathetic, aren't you? Hiding behind your screens, pretending to be all-powerful hackers. Get a life." It took only a few seconds before the responses started pouring in. Most were the typical internet retorts, people calling me an idiot, telling me to leave. But there was one message that stood out. It was simple, just one word: watch. Something about that word sent a chill down my spine, but I ignored it and kept going. Watch what? You guys can't do anything. You're all talk. The chat room exploded with messages. Some were laughing, others were threatening, but one user, the same one who had sent the watch message, stayed quiet. I didn't think much of it at the time. I was caught up in the adrenaline rush of provoking these faceless people. Then, I made my biggest mistake. I directed my taunts specifically at the quiet user. "Hey, you there, what's the matter? Cat got your tongue? You scared or something?" A few moments of silence passed. I could almost feel the tension through the screen. Then a new message popped up. This one wasn't a taunt or a threat. It was my full name. Just my name, typed out in clear, bold letters. My heart skipped a beat. I hadn't used my real name anywhere on the dark web, or so I thought. I sat there staring at the screen, trying to convince myself it was just a coincidence. But before I could even process it, another message appeared. My address. My actual home address. Panic started to set in. I watched in horror as the user continued to post more of my personal information, my IP address, details about my job, and even a description of what I was wearing that night. It was like they were watching me, like they could see into my living room. I quickly typed, "Who are you? How do you know this?" My hands were shaking, and I could barely keep my fingers steady on the keyboard. A new message appeared almost instantly. "You messed with the wrong guy." I felt sick to my stomach. This wasn't just some random troll. This person knew everything about me, and they weren't messing around. I realized too late that I had poked a bear, a very dangerous bear. My mind raced with thoughts of how they could know so much. Had they hacked into my system already? Were they watching me through my webcam? I didn't get much time to think before my screen went black, completely black. My computer was unresponsive. I tried to reboot it, but nothing happened. I was in full-blown panic mode now. I reached for my phone to call someone, anyone, but as soon as I unlocked it, I saw that it too was behaving strangely. Random apps were opening and closing, and my screen was glitching out. I felt utterly helpless. It was like I had opened a door to a world of horror and couldn't close it, all because I decided to mess around in a chat room on the dark web. I was in a state of sheer panic. My computer was dead, my phone was going haywire, and I had no idea what to do next. It felt like the walls of my apartment were closing in on me. I had to get out, get help, but I didn't even know where to start. Just then, another message popped up on my phone, even though it was glitching. It read, "We're watching you. Don't even think about running." How could this be happening? I was terrified. They knew my every move, and I had no idea who they even were. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing heart, and forced myself to think logically. I needed to shut everything down. I yanked the power cord from my computer and turned off my phone. Maybe, just maybe, that would stop them from seeing me. I sat there in the dark for what felt like hours, my mind racing with thoughts of what I'd done to provoke this. It was all my fault. I had taunted them, thinking it was just a harmless game. I should have known better. I work in IT, for crying out loud. I know the kind of damage skilled hackers can do. Finally, I decided I couldn't just sit there. I needed help, professional help. I grabbed my coat and headed to my car. As I drove to my friend Mark's house, I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting someone to be following me. Mark was a cybersecurity expert, the best guy I knew who could help me out of this mess. I arrived at Mark's place and banged on his door until he answered. It was past midnight, and he looked half asleep, but the look on my face must have told him something was seriously wrong. I told him everything, from the chat room to the messages, to my computer and phone being hacked. Mark listened carefully, his expression growing more serious by the minute. "You really pissed off the wrong people, man," he said, shaking his head. "These guys aren't amateurs. They're pros, and they don't mess around." He guided me to his office, a small room filled with computer screens and high-tech equipment. He handed me a new laptop, one that wasn't connected to anything yet. "We need to figure out what they did to your system," he said, starting to type rapidly on his keyboard. As Mark worked, I felt a small glimmer of hope. If anyone could help me, it was him. He began by scanning my devices for any malware or spyware they might have installed. It didn't take long for him to find several programs embedded deep within my system. Programs designed to monitor my every move and steal my information. "This is bad," he muttered. "They've got everything. Your passwords, your bank information, everything." My stomach churned. Everything? How could I have been so stupid? Mark spent the next few hours cleaning my devices and securing my accounts. He helped me change all my passwords, set up two-factor authentication, and even contact my bank to put a freeze on my accounts. But it wasn't just about cleaning up the mess. Mark knew we needed to figure out who these people were and how to stop them from coming after me again. He started digging deeper, tracing the origins of the malware, trying to find any clues that could lead us back to the hackers. As the sun began to rise, Mark finally sat back in his chair, exhausted. "I've done what I can for now," he said, "but you need to lay low. Stay off the internet as much as possible, and don't engage with anyone suspicious. These people don't forget easily." I thanked Mark profusely, but the fear in my gut remained. This wasn't over. I knew it. They knew it. I had poked the bear, and now I had to deal with the consequences. I left Mark's place as the first light of dawn began to break, my mind a whirlwind of anxiety and fear. Every shadow seemed like a threat, every passerby a potential enemy. I drove back to my apartment, feeling a little better knowing my devices were clean. But Mark's warning echoed in my head. Stay off the internet as much as possible, and don't engage with anyone suspicious. I thought things would settle down after Mark's intervention. I was wrong. A few days later, I received a call from my bank. They told me there had been several attempts to access my account from different locations around the world. Thankfully, the freeze Mark had helped me put in place prevented any withdrawals, but the attempts were relentless. Someone was hell-bent on getting my money. Next, I started noticing strange activity on my social media accounts. Posts and messages I hadn't written. Friend requests to people I didn't know. It was clear someone was trying to impersonate me, to get information from my friends and family. I had to deactivate all my accounts, cutting off a major part of my social life. Then came the worst of it. One evening, I was watching TV, trying to distract myself from the nightmare my life had become. when my screen flickered. I thought it was just a glitch, but then it happened again and again. Suddenly, the TV went black and then bright white letters appeared on the screen. "We warned you." I sat frozen, my heart pounding in my chest. How were they doing this? I hadn't even connected my new devices to the internet. The message disappeared and the TV returned to its regular program. I felt a wave of nausea. They were still watching me. In the following days, my paranoia reached new heights. I taped over my webcam, unplugged my smart TV, and even started turning off my phone when I wasn't using it. But it didn't stop. My new computer, the one Mark had given me, began acting strangely too. Files disappeared and reappeared, settings changed on their own. And sometimes, late at night, I'd hear the faint clicking of keys as if someone was typing on it. Then the ultimate blow came. I woke up one morning to find my computer completely fried. The screen was black, and it wouldn't turn on at all. I took it back to Mark, but he said it was beyond repair. They had sent a power surge through it, frying the circuits and rendering it useless. It was a clear message. They could reach me no matter what precautions I took. Without a functioning computer, I was cut off from my work and much of my daily life. I felt trapped, isolated, and helpless. It wasn't just the inconvenience. It was the knowledge that someone out there had the power to dismantle my life bit by bit, and there was nothing I could do to stop them. I spent the next few weeks living in a state of constant fear. Every noise made me jump. Every unexpected event sent my heart racing. I barely slept, haunted by nightmares of faceless hackers pulling the strings of my life. I couldn't continue like this. I knew I had to do something drastic. I decided to take Mark's advice seriously. I went off the grid, at least as much as I could. I stopped using the internet at home altogether, only accessing it from public places like libraries and internet cafes. I changed my phone number and got a basic phone without smart features. I also moved to a new apartment, hoping a change of address might throw them off my trail. It was a tough adjustment, but gradually, the relentless attacks began to subside. My accounts remained secure, and the strange occurrences became less frequent. It seemed my efforts to distance myself from the digital world had finally paid off. But the fear never really went away. Every time I think about logging back onto the dark web, my heart races and I remember those terrifying days. The feeling of being watched, of having my life torn apart by unseen hands, is something I'll never forget. I learned my lesson the hard way. The dark web is not a playground. It's a realm where dangerous people lurk, and provoking them can lead to unimaginable consequences. I used to be curious, reckless even, but now I know better. I stay away from the dark web, and I urge anyone reading this to do the same. Some doors, once opened, can never be fully closed. It's been several months since that horrifying experience, and my life has slowly started to regain a semblance of normalcy. Moving to a new apartment and cutting off most of my digital presence has helped, but the fear lingers like a shadow I can't shake off. Every time I think about going back online, a cold dread grips my heart. Living off the grid has its challenges. I've had to find new ways to stay connected with friends and family. Handwritten letters have made a comeback in my life, and I've rediscovered the joy of face-to-face conversations. It's old-fashioned, but it's also comforting to know there's no way my words can be twisted or used against me. I've become more cautious, almost paranoid, about my digital footprint. Whenever I do need to use the internet, I take extreme precautions: VPNs, anonymous browsers, secure networks. It's a hassle, but it's the price I pay for peace of mind. One positive outcome of this whole ordeal is that it's taught me the importance of cyber hygiene. I've made it my mission to educate others about the dangers of the dark web and the importance of staying safe online. I volunteer at local schools, giving talks about internet safety, and I've started writing articles and blog posts to share my experience and warn others. Despite these efforts to move on, the memory of that night still haunts me. I often wake up in a cold sweat, replaying the events in my mind. The faceless hacker who tore apart my life remains a phantom lurking in my nightmares. I'll never forget the feeling of absolute helplessness, knowing that someone out there had the power to ruin me with just a few keystrokes. But I've also learned resilience. I've learned that even when faced with unimaginable fear, we can find ways to rebuild and move forward. My life has taken a different path now, one filled with caution, but also with purpose. I've become an advocate for online safety, hoping that my story can prevent others from making the same mistakes I did. To anyone reading this, let my experience be a cautionary tale. The dark web is not a place to be trifled with. It's a realm filled with dangers that can reach into your life and tear it apart in ways you can't even imagine. Stay safe, stay smart, and remember that some curiosities are best left unexplored. In the end, I'm grateful for the second chance I've been given. I'm thankful for friends like Mark, who stood by me and helped me through the darkest days. Most importantly, I've learned to respect the power of the digital world and the real dangers that come with it. Stay safe out there, and remember, curiosity can be a dangerous thing. Think twice before venturing into the unknown, because sometimes what you find might be more than you can handle.